Hello, welcome to the channel Wise Stories. Enjoy watching.
Mirabelle thought she had been unlucky all her life. It was either karma or a family curse that haunted her. She did not know for sure, but she knew that for every good fortune she had about 7 bad fortunes. It was like this since childhood, and it will probably be so in the future. The owner of such a beautiful name thought doomfully. Usually, all the worst things happened in late autumn, about the end of October or early November. That was why Mirabelle hated this cold and dreary time of year. It was hard for her to love the repetitive moments of nature in which many years ago a monstrous and totally unfair tragedy occurred to her family. Mirabelle was 5 when her parents' car overturned on a slippery road in late November. It was freezing at night, and in the morning the roadway was shiny with a crust of ice that had already hardened. The girl was at home with her grandmother, Juanita. The parents went to visit relatives for a birthday party. The couple knew that the party would most likely last until late at night, so they decided not to torture the child and didn't take Mirabelle with them. The little girl remembered how, in the middle of the night, the phone rang loudly and distressingly. Grandmother went to the phone. Mirabelle heard her steps and then a sleepy hello. After that, there was total silence in the hallway for a few seconds, and then there was a rumbling sound. Mirabelle immediately jumped out of bed, and when she ran out into the hallway, she was horrified to see her unconscious grandmother on the floor. Doctors at the hospital later said that the girl's father and mother had miraculously survived that terrible car accident, but both parents were seriously injured and were in the hospital for a long time before they could go home. Mirabelle's mother Laura received a severe concussion and since then has had serious memory problems, which have only worsened with age. Alberto, her father, was even less fortunate. The man was permanently disabled, having suffered a severe fracture of the spine. Henceforth, the man could move only in a wheelchair. In addition, he was constantly suffering from headaches, and any painkillers could not help. Of course, doctors believed that Mirabelle's parents could still be returned to a more or less active social life if they can get certain medications. However, it was too expensive. They didn't have that kind of money, so Juanita undertook the care and treatment of both of them. For the next 10 years, right up to graduation, Mirabelle helped Juanita keep her parents well. It was out of the question for them to return to their usual jobs. Mirabelle's mother used to work as a saleswoman almost without weekends, and on her only free night she hurried to the nearest car service center in their village, where she worked part-time as a cleaner. As for her father, his place as the driver of the combine and other large industrial machinery on the farm was quickly taken by a young and healthy guy, someone from the protege of the owner of the agricultural complex. Both parents were on disability allowance and the grandmother had a pension, and that was all their income. From the moment their unfortunate car crashed, Mirabelle's childhood ended abruptly and harsh adulthood began, and the main task of the unfortunate family was to survive in the harsh conditions of village life. The grandmother and granddaughter couldn't afford anything for themselves, spending all the money received from the state on medicines for sick family members. Her parents were worried that their condition can affect the future of their beloved daughter. "Oh, Mirabelle, you shouldn't spend all your time with us," Alberto said often, tightening the bolts on the wheels of his wheelchair. His hands were still more or less mobile. "You should send us to the nursing home, and that would be the end of the story. You should be out with boys, not with helpless cripples. Dad, I told you so many times not to call yourself and Mom cripples. Yes, tragedy has happened, and yes, it's very hard for all of us, but we are family. We have to take care of each other, and we will continue to do so as long as I am strong enough." "Yeah," Dad waved the screwdriver, "as long as you are strong enough. You are young, but you'll ruin your life now, and then you'll blame us for everything. It seems to you that you can cope with life all to yourself, but life is a long thing. We have no idea what happens tomorrow. You can become an old maid in a shabby home with no one to fix it. However, Mirabelle was not used to giving up. She did everything she could to earn an extra penny for her family. As a high school student, she walked around the neighborhood offering her services as a nanny and tutor, tutoring first graders in Spanish and math. As she got a little older, Mirabelle took her mother's place working part-time at a car repair shop. Money from cleaning services helped the family to survive. And there was also a farm and vegetable garden. The girl ran around like a squirrel in a cage, trying to combine domestic chores, studies, and part-time jobs on the same day. When Mirabelle was 16, her grandmother Juanita suddenly got sick. At a doctor's appointment, she was diagnosed with a brain disease that could not be treated with medicine. Only surgery could help, but it cost a lot of money, and the waiting list for free surgery was too long. "Well, sweetheart, what will be," sighed Juanita sadly. "I guess I will not make it to your wedding." "What are you talking about, Granny? What wedding?" said Mirabelle indignantly. "We need to get you on your feet first, and then everything else. And who needs such a hapless girl?" A sad smile flashed on the kind girl's face. "Oh, Mirabelle, I did not think that I would have to leave this world so soon. I thought I would live longer and help you and your parents. I can't imagine how you live here without me." "Don't say nonsense," her granddaughter scolded her. "We must try to wait for the free surgery, and then I'll go to the Capitol and try to get an appointment with the chief surgeon. Maybe I can speed up the process. I will tell him about our situation. Maybe everything will be sorted out somehow." Juanita only stroked Mirabelle's head affectionately. "You look just like your mother." The old woman's eyes sparkled with tears. "She was just as stubborn as you are, and now sometimes she can't even remember her name. Mirabelle, you are very kind. I will pray to God for only one thing when I start to recover, for your life to be different, for your happiness." The girl wiped away the old woman's tears and replied, trying to make it a joke, "Come on, Grandma, you know, I'm the unlucky one in our family." It was as if a stone had appeared in her heart at that moment. It suddenly became somehow heavy and very, very anxious. Her intuition did not fail her. Her trip to the capital city ended up with nothing. Mirabelle managed to meet the surgeon, but it stopped there. After a careful examination of Juanita's medical records, the surgeon dispelled the girl's last illusions, saying that there were months, if not years, waiting in line for such surgeries. And even very wealthy people sometimes have to wait for a long time. "Sorry," the surgeon said. "All I can do for you in this difficult situation is to express my sincere sympathy. Try to spend more time with your grandmother. This may be the last year for her." It was October. Mirabelle realized that another dark time in her life would come very soon, and so it did. At the very beginning of December, when the ground was covered with the first layer of snow, grandmother was gone. The whole village came to her funeral. She had given the best years of her life to the only school in the village. She taught chemistry and biology to the children. Almost everyone who lived in this village went to this school and knew Juanita well. So when they found out what had happened, they immediately collected some money and helped the family organize a funeral. The family was left with just the three of them, the mother, the father, and Mirabelle. Since the death of the grandmother, some of the money disappeared. Juanita's pension, Alberto, who by this time felt more strength in his hands, decided to help his daughter, who was torn between study and work, and began to make small souvenirs out of wood, which he later took to a small village market or sold at the railway station to travelers passing by from the inner city trains. Her father tried to give every penny he received to Mirabelle. "Darling, take the money and at least buy yourself a new dress for graduation. It would be a shame if our daughters came to the party in an old sweater and a skirt." Her father tried to persuade Mirabelle. Don't. Dad, put the money in the piggy bank. We'll find a more useful use for it, she answered. And then, I will not go to the prom. What am I going to do there? Mirabel, why? Laura intervened in the conversation with a deep sadness in her voice. Prom only happens once in a lifetime. The prior woman felt guilty before her daughter. Because of her illness, she could not find even a simple part-time job. Her memory failed at the most inconvenient moments, and then Laura could not remember even the most basic things, such as how to hold the knob or how to open the door. Mirabel only said it wasn't such an important day, and she didn't really want to go to the prom, and it wasn't worth spending a huge amount of money for the sake of it. Despite all the difficulties, the girl managed to finish school with good results. After graduation, Mirabel planned to start looking for a job right away, because she had no strength to continue her education, and she had no money to pay for her studies at a decent university. Realizing that she was really needed here, the girl tried to do everything possible to somehow provide her family with at least a minimum income. However, finding a full-time job in the village was not easy. Basically, only people with technical knowledge or professional farming skills were needed here. The family had only poultry. Mirabel had only basic pieces of knowledge about chickens and geese. On the other hand, the girl really wanted to go to work as a professor de educación primaria, but unfortunately, this position required education she didn't have. Fortunately, at the time, one of the elderly teachers who knew Juanita well was preparing to become a grandmother for the third time. Her daughter, who worked in the library, was once again preparing to go on a long maternity leave, so she offered that position to Mirabel. Needless to say, Mirabel accepted without hesitation. She liked the new place of work. It was a quiet place, and she didn't have to do many duties. The most difficult was watering the flowers and cleaning the tiny reading room. Mirabel was quick-witted and not lazy, so she could easily learn the basics of librarianship. Nothing more was required of her. It was in the library that she first saw Antonio. He was not tall, but had a good body and thick, curly brown hair. The guy quickly won the heart of the young librarian. Antonio wandered perplexedly between the shelves, clearly not knowing which book to choose. Mirabel was just in time to help him. "Are you looking for something specific?" she asked politely. "An author? A certain genre?" The boy blushed, not knowing what answer was best. Finally, he uncertainly said, "You know, I'm not really choosing for myself. My aunt broke her leg. She is in the hospital now. She asked me to bring something to read, preferably a romance novel. And you know, I don't really know anything about romance novels." Mirabel smiled a little slyly, involuntarily shaking her beautiful long hair. "Then I suggest you take Jackie Collins. Your aunt will love it. It's classic," she said, pulling the right book from the shelf. Antonio thanked Mirabel. That's how they met. Then he often went to see the girl at work, under the pretext of choosing books for his mother and godmother. Both by that time knew they had mutual feelings. However, they continued to behave as if there was nothing between them except a purely professional relationship of reader and librarian. A month later, Antonio dared to ask Mirabel on their first date, after which they officially became a couple. However, the young people did not spend as much time together as they wanted. Antonio went to serve in the army, and he was forced to leave for 2 years. Mirabel promised to wait for him, and she honestly kept her word. Time flew by, but when Antonio returned from the army, there was a very unpleasant surprise for Mirabel. The guy suddenly stopped answering the phone when she tried to call him. Mirabel did not understand what was wrong, because while her beloved was in the army, she tried to keep in touch with him in every possible way. She sent him letters, her pictures, and all sorts of goodies that she could buy on her modest salary as a librarian. In one of their last letters, shortly before his demobilization, The young couple agreed to marry as soon as Antonio returned home. The girl began to worry if something bad had happened to her fiancé. Trying to find out the truth, Mirabel came to Antonio's Aunt Ramona and firmly asked her to finally tell her what had happened to her beloved. Ramona, being a mature woman, understood perfectly well what had happened. However, they were still a little afraid to tell this to a girl who had a hard fate. Mirabel visited Antonio before the army. Ramona raised him alone, and she liked Mirabel. However, it was impossible to command the heart of the young gentleman. Today he loves one girl, and tomorrow cannot live without the other. Mirabel, she began carefully, I know you are a clever girl, and therefore you will understand everything, and I am sure you will be able to forgive Antonio. Not immediately, with time, but I think you can. Mirabel immediately worried. A bad feeling pricked her chest, like a small, sharp needle. The girl's mouth went dry in a moment. Ramona, what happened? Where is Antonio? She asked the woman, looking in the eyes. Ramona fixed glasses and thin gold frames on her nose. You see, Mirabel, it happens in life. Well, Antonio chose another fiancé. The girl, hearing the news, barely had time to grab the back of a chair in the small kitchen and stand on her feet. She was sure that everything inside her was shattered. What do you mean, another fiancé? Mirabel said. When? How? It's been 3 months now. Honestly, I wasn't happy that Antonio hadn't written to you about it either. He should have told you himself. At least you wouldn't have waited for him then. You would have looked at other guys. You would know that you're single now. Why, Antonio and I wanted to live together until our old age. We were planning a vacation together. Mirabel seemed to lose her mind, repeating the same phrases over and over. Ramona was frightened and hurried to pour her a glass of cold water. The girl looked insane. Don't blame yourself, girl. He did not do it out of spite. When he saw Catalina last spring, he immediately fell in love with her. He couldn't control his feelings. Catalina? Mirabel could only interrogate after taking a few sips of water. Is she the daughter of Alcalde? Yes, the woman answered quietly. He told me later that he couldn't decide between you two, that he loved both of you. Mirabel could not believe it. Her fiancé was dating 2 girls at the same time. Catalina was a popular, beautiful girl and the daughter of Alcalde, and clearly the desire to get a rich wife instead of a hapless girl overcame in Antonio all feelings towards her. Ramona, where is Antonio now? Mirabel asked in a strange voice. The woman hesitated and did not want to answer. You should not know, Mirabel. But still, the girl insisted. Today is his wedding with Catalina. Mirabel didn't remember how she got home. It wasn't important now. Her most precious asset had been taken away from her. What else could the girl oppose this harsh world and her own heart? After what had happened, Mirabel became indifferent to everything, as if she had lost the most important part of herself, which was responsible for the desire to live and look optimistically into the future. Later she saw Antonio and Catalina several more times before they finally moved to another city. Antonio preferred not to look at an ex-girlfriend in the eyes, but he still blushed charmingly with embarrassment, as on the first day they met. But now it did not cause in Mirabel the former bursts of tenderness. The young librarian's heart seemed completely empty, with nothing left in it except the care of her parents and the daily duty of going to work. However, work was now also becoming more and more disturbing to Mirabel. Almost everything here reminded her of the happy days she had spent with Antonio, the happy days of falsehood, when after a date with her, he rushed to a second girlfriend, much richer and much more beautiful. The result of mental torment was Mirabel's decision to leave her native and at the same time hated the village. In fact, Mirabel's best friends Louisa and Leticia took the initiative. The girls had been planning to move to the city, and now they finally had enough money to do it. Seeing how their best friend was suffering, they offered her to go with them. "Come on, Mirabel," Leticia persuaded her. "What is keeping you here except your parents? There you will get a new life, and you will find your happiness." Yes, happiness. Louisa was more rational, so she interjected. First, it would be better to find a job and to rent a house, preferably not in the suburbs. But in general, Leticia is right. You should leave this village for a while and try to start from scratch. Trite, but true. Mirabel shook her head uncertainly as the three of them sat in Leticia's kitchen, drinking instant coffee from large ceramic mug. "Oh, girls, that's what scares me. Who's going to take care of Mom and Dad? They'll be lost without me." "Talk to your neighbors. You've known them all your life," Louisa said. "Just talk to them. Explain the situation. I think they will understand everything and will help." "They are strangers, Louisa," Mirabel said uneasily. "If anything happens, they may not know what to do. Write them instructions on a piece of paper. I've seen people do that in movies." Leticia easily offered a solution to the problem. "Good idea," said Louisa primly, and laughed. Her tinkling laughter infected everyone, including Mirabel. For a moment the girl thought that this was it, that all problems can be solved if only to apply a little logic and not be afraid to ask someone you know for help. However, the good mood did not last long. When she got home, she felt the burden of everyday problems again. Her father, seeing his daughter's gloomy mood, dared to ask what was the cause. He knew that Mirabel was still suffering from the betrayal of her fiancé, and so he wanted to relieve her torment. At first, the girl did not want to talk about her desire to leave, but then she gave in. After listening to her, Alberto, to the surprise of his daughter, was happy. It turned out that he had long wanted Mirabel to finally start living her own life away from home. "You have to go with them, sweetheart," the father said joyfully and took the girl's hands. "Me and Mom will be okay. Don't worry about us. Benito lives nearby. He is always bringing firewood. Francisca from the third house, she is a former nurse. She will look after you, Mom. We are not alone. People will help us." Tears of gratitude glistened in her eyes. "Thank you, Daddy," she whispered, kissing her father tenderly on the cheek. "I promise. I will take you to my place as soon as I get settled there." "Okay, enough." He patted his daughter on the back. "Stop crying. We are about to drown in tears." Alberto smiled sincerely, and Mirabel felt that the ice crust on her soul slightly cracked, and a warm, gentle wave of hope squeezed into her heart. A few days later, after collecting the rest of her savings and grudgingly taking some of the money her father had managed to collect, Mirabel and her friends set off to the capital city to the new life. The huge, noisy metropolis really stunned the girl. Unlike her humble village, life was literally boiling on every corner, round the clock. Storefronts glowed with inviting lights, awakening in Mirabel a vague desire to be young, which she had long ago forbidden to herself. Beautiful goods beckoned and attracted the eye, promising sweet prosperity. But Mirabel realized that it was all just an illusion, a beautiful lure for provincials and those who have not yet had time to understand how life in the capital works. However, after the village, where the only scenery was the river and the local club, she was impressed by the chicness of the big city. The girls managed to rent a room for 3 not far from the subway, and then they began to actively look for work. The first unpleasant surprise was waiting for them there. Almost all of the more or less decent places asked for a detailed resume with work experience, as well as a positive recommendation from a previous employer. None of them had it. Leticia worked for a few months as a milkmaid on a farm. and Louisa tried to get accounting skills at the same car service where Mirabelle had worked part-time. Thus, they had almost no experience. Mirabelle was always offered only two job options: either work as a janitor in stores and shopping malls, or as a salesperson. She knew from her mother's experience that both of these professions would never be good for her. In both cases, she would only get health problems and finally lose the chance to find her own way in this life. The girl also tried to get a job in the city's large libraries. And there were a lot of libraries in the city, but alas, unlike the village libraries, they required special education and impeccable appearance, which Mirabelle, who came to the capital in an old sweater and pants, restitched for the third time, certainly could not boast of. She had been shown the door, sometimes politely, sometimes not so much. Desperate to find a decent job, the friends took the money they had and paid a recruitment agency specialist to find them at least a job with a salary they could survive on. Fortunately, the result was not long in coming. A couple of days later, the girls were invited to a job interview. Mirabelle got a job as a maid in a luxury mansion, including accommodation and meals. The girl was warned that candidates for this position are evaluated very strictly, and if she fails the probationary period, she can hardly count on any other job in the metropolis. Mirabelle believed in her strength and thought that if she was able to combine janitorial and gardening duties, looking after the library plants in her former position, she could do the maid's duties as well. She agreed and got all the coordinates she needed from the employer and then waited for a call back. The agency assured her she should be contacted within a few days. What if they don't call? She shared her doubts with her friends. I can't even imagine how I will get back to our village. My father probably already imagines me as a successful businesswoman. They will call, you'll see, Louisa assured her, adjusting her new uniform. The girl already got a job, and now she was starting her first day as a beauty salon receptionist. It was a small salon, but the salary there was promised to be good. Laetitia was also lucky enough to get a job as a receptionist, but at a fitness club. Finally, Mirabelle got a call, and after clarifying some business matters, was told to pack and wait for the company car, which would pick her up to take her to the mansion the next morning. Mirabelle was very nervous. A trip to the luxury residential complex, moreover with the opportunity to live in a luxurious mansion, simultaneously delighted and frightened the girl. And what will happen if she does not pass the probationary period? What if she cannot make the bed properly or bring her employer's breakfast? All these questions haunted Mirabelle, so she couldn't fall asleep the night before. The girl felt in her gut that she would soon have a new life, but what was it? The former librarian's inner voice did not answer that question. Early in the morning, a large black business car with tinted windows drove up to the entrance of the building where the three friends lived. Mirabelle was already waiting downstairs with her modest belongings. She hugged her friends goodbye and got into the car. The interior impressed her with its cleanliness, soft leather upholstery, and pleasant scent. The cabs that occasionally drove from the train station to their village always smelled of fish and tobacco, and the seats were often stained with oil and traces of hard liquor. The landscape outside the window was incredibly beautiful. The road, which gradually went beyond the city borders, was replaced first by neatly planted ornamental trees, and then by high-end mansions. The huge houses were like postcards, like the houses from the movies about the carefree life that Mirabelle had only read about in books. After passing a checkpoint with a striped barrier, the car entered a closed suburban complex, which was completely impossible to get into without an invitation. Mirabelle felt as she were in some other world. She saw beautiful, huge houses everywhere, more like real castles. She did not know yet that she would soon be working in one of them. Finally, the car stopped in front of the gate of one of these mansions. When Mirabelle got out, she immediately felt the unpleasant stares of 2 or 3 cameras closely watching the movements of the girl and the driver. "Well, we're here," the man reported. "Wait here for a while, and I'll tell the owners about you." The man called the video intercom installed in a special alcove next to the gate, and after a few seconds he walked through the slowly sliding steel doors. The luxurious house with a swimming pool, green golf course, and stunning maze-shaped rose garden belonged to the Garcia family. The head of the family was a very powerful businessman who was accompanied on all trips and business meetings by his wife, Ophelia, who was the company's CFO. The Garcia company specialized in the international transportation of millet and other crops, and that's why they were nicknamed the Bread Kings. The couple's network also owned several dozen bakeries, scattered not only in the capital, but also throughout the country. There were 1 or 2 branches of the company in each region, so the business worked with the precision of a Swiss watch. Their adult son, Diego, also lived in this gorgeous mansion. The boy was very handsome, but his personality was simply disgusting. He was a spoiled young man of 25, often hysterical, leading a life of debauchery, full of forbidden pleasures. His parents' money had spoiled him since childhood, making him an utter egomaniac, and therefore Diego considered any person in his sight to be a thing, not a human. The only difference was that, as he liked to say, he had to pay several times more for a human thing. Expensive alcohol, wild pool parties, and illegal substances in the company of beautiful girls. This was the range of interests of young Garcia. The spouses didn't like the fun their son was having, but they didn't worry about it, and they didn't try to re-educate him in any way. His parents believed that all kids of wealthy people had to go through this vicious cycle at a young age to get full of it and eventually lose interest in this kind of life. After that, their children usually calmed down and switched to education and the serious management of the family business. Fortunately, in the first few days when Mirabelle arrived at their house, the boy didn't show up. He either slept until the night after wild parties or spent the day with friends, the same rich kids. He only noticed the arrival of a new maid a couple of weeks later. "I hope you've been briefed on your probation," Pepita, the formidable housekeeper of the Garcia mansion, asked the young girl sternly. The tall, skinny woman saw many pretty young girls trying to sneak into the master's son's bedroom, or worse, into the master himself, under the guise of maids. Over the years of managing the mansion, Pepita had learned to spot this kind of girls right away and get rid of them. The latest attempt was a success. A young provincial girl from the village decided that she could get the owner's son and even get married to him. However, the housekeeper detected a problem in time and kicked the wretch out, and at the same time she took care of her bright future. Now, this girl will not get a job in any decent establishment. Now she had a choice, to go back home or to stay in the city, but to go to sell her body. The only thing Pepita needed from Mirabelle, the new maid, was to properly fulfill her duties. What they really needed was a good, hard-working, reliable girl who could help in any circumstance, whether it was a formal dinner in the house or a traditional family reunion in a small circle of friends and close relatives. The maid in their house was supposed to be a shadow, but also to perform many different functions. The slightest deviation from the course set by the senior housekeeper could cost both the girl and the housekeeper too much. Remember, Mirabelle, it is up to you and your behavior whether you can work off the contract and leave this house for a new life with a brilliant reverence and career prospects, or, Pepita glared at the girl again, or you will never get a job in this city again. Is that clear? Absolutely, Mirabelle answered quietly, staring at the floor. I came here to do my job, and I don't want any trouble. I just want to work here, Miss Pepita. She only smiled in response. Good answer. Now, let's see what you can do. Mirabelle spent the next week learning how to make the beds properly, how to carry 2 trays of food and drinks in one hand, how to clean the rooms of the mansion, and how to keep everything in order. And most important of all, she was learning to be invisible. All the staff began the day at 5 in the morning. That was an hour later than Mirabelle was used to getting up at home to feed and let the birds out to graze. This was followed by a short meeting, where all the staff must necessarily be present. At this meeting, everyone was given their work plan for the day. After this, they had 15 minutes for breakfast before their workday began. None of the men or women, and there were 10 employees, ever thought of trying to slack off or shirk their duties, and they could hardly have done so, for the mansion was filled with video cameras, both visible and hidden. So it was simply impossible to avoid doing their job here. Very soon, Mirabelle proved to everyone in the house that she had not been hired for nothing. The girl worked neatly and diligently, and was the last to leave the evening staff meeting where Pepita discussed the results of each employer's work for the previous day. Pepita was pleased with the modesty and the quality of the new maid's work. Mirabelle was one of those few girls, born and raised in the provinces, who came to the big city to work, not to seek easy benefits at the expense of flirting with the bosses. Pepita had never praised her staff, believing that praise only relaxes them and makes them lazy. But in this case, the woman was so pleasantly surprised by Mirabelle's behavior that she briefly and coldly, but still praised the girl. You can achieve a lot in this life, Mirabelle. Believe me, I've seen a lot over the years of working and living in this house. You are the rare exception to the sad rule. Thank you, she replied, still looking at the floor. I am honored to hear you say that, Pepita. Mirabelle was a little afraid of the stern, skinny housekeeper. She had been instructed beforehand on how to communicate with Pepita so as not to get into trouble, and she was really surprised to hear such positive feedback on her work. However, the new maid still had the feeling that it was all part of one big test, and she should constantly be on the alert and not succumb to the manifestation of her own emotions. The first time it happened was a month after Mirabelle had moved into Garcia's house. That's when she first felt that sticky gaze on her, which made her want to take a shower. One day, leaving his room late at night and recovering from another hangover, Diego Garcia met their new maid in the hallway. This rich man immediately noted that the girl was quite attractive. He especially liked Mirabelle's natural golden reddish hair. The girl was different from all the dyed blondes and brunettes with injected lips. Diego deftly caught the maid on her way to the storeroom and, taking the vacuum cleaner from her hands, began an unexpected introduction with the following phrase. Wow, my dad didn't tell me that we hired such a charming nymph. Mirabelle sensed only the strong smell of over-drinking coming from the Empire's successor at that moment. Good evening. My name is Mirabelle. I'm your new maid, the girl answered as the housekeeper taught her. I was hired a month ago. You and I have met before. You just didn't pay attention. Garcia wrinkled his forehead. He was obviously trying to remember the girl, but failed. Well, great, Mirabelle thought with relief. If he doesn't remember me, then I'm doing my job right. Never mind, mumbled the boy. Mirabelle? And why is a girl with such a beautiful name has to clean the house late at night instead of going to her room to sleep? Diego looked at the maid with surprisingly beautiful, but also empty gray eyes. It seemed as if all his soul left him long ago, leaving behind only ashes. For a second, Garcia reminded Mirabelle of the famous Dorian Gray, or rather how this literary character might look in real life, who has transferred all his black viciousness to the canvas of his own portrait. I'm here because cleaning is my job, the girl replied politely, but slightly aloof. If you'll excuse me, I'll take the vacuum cleaner to the utility room. The staff meeting is about to start. I have to be there." Garcia Jr. slowly ran his tongue over his lips at the same time, looking at the girl from head to toe. "Well, sure, go, nymph, or the old crow will tell that I kidnap her maids again. But we will see each other again soon, Mirabelle." The poor maid felt a bitter lump in her throat. The rich man had not only spoken negatively about Pepita, but allowed himself to speak too unceremoniously to Mirabelle. She wanted to bathe immediately. Unfortunately, this encounter with the rich heir was not the last for Mirabelle. Ever since he saw Mirabelle and talked to her, his thoughts have constantly revolved around the pretty and innocent maid. "I wish I knew if she really tasted as fresh as she looked," the boy thought, lying in front of the huge television set in his room. A wide, multicolored screen was broadcasting adult movies. Diego slowly ran his index finger over his knee, imagining that his new maid was doing it. After this incident, the rich man began to hint to Mirabelle that she could get a lot more money if she satisfied his special needs. However, the girl was disgusted at the idea that this man would touch her. Of course, Mirabelle knew that what he wanted from her was not love and sincere feelings, but something far banaler and at the same time terrible. "Why are you pushing me away? Calm down." Once again he grabbed the girl by the arms under the stairs and whispered passionately in her ear, "You act as if you had no other man before me, or am I right?" By the pale Mirabelle's face, the scoundrel realized that he had hit the target. Garcia Jr.'s face stretched in a lewd smile. He looked at the maid with a sticky gaze again. "Don't be afraid. I'll be gentle, very gentle with you." He tried to stroke her thigh. Mirabelle tried to scream, but the boy squeezed her thin hand to the point of pain. "Don't even try to scream, understand? Or you'll be out of this house and never get a job in this city again." Suddenly, a tall, skinny figure appeared in the doorway, and it was Pepita. "Diego, I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's an urgent call for you. Something about the cyber stakes," the housekeeper said in a cold tone. The rich man reluctantly pulled away from Mirabelle. The unfortunate girl stood there like frozen. With a warning glance at her, the guy slipped silently past Pepita as if he were a huge snake. The housekeeper looked at Mirabelle. She could see that this time it was not the maid herself who had taken the initiative, and she wanted to sincerely sympathize with the girl, especially since there were legends about the love affairs of the master's son in this city. But with all her sympathy for Mirabelle, she could not allow the rumors about Garcia Jr.'s liaison with another maid. As much as she felt sorry for her best employee, she had to solve the problem caused by the rich man herself. "Sort out your affairs with Diego as quickly as possible," advised the housekeeper in an indifferent voice. "People in the house should not find out about what is going on, even if it is not your fault." The girl only nodded in reply. She was trembling like a leaf on an autumn breeze. "Okay, Pepita, I will try to sort everything out as soon as possible." The maid thought at this moment that she had completely forgotten to mark her most unhappy time of the year on the calendar. It was the end of November. For a couple of days after that, the owner's son left the girl alone. Mirabelle had a faint hope that Diego might have had time to become interested in someone else by this time. However, all was in vain. The rich man thought only of how to get what he wanted as soon as possible, and was not going to give up. He only wanted to lull the maid's vigilance into a cunning execution of his cunning plan. The right opportunity came a few days later when his parents once again left for a profitable deal with foreign investors. Late at night, the boy came into the girl's bedroom and began to wake her up. "Mirabelle, hey, wake up." You forgot to turn off the faucet in the utility room when you filled this reservoir. Did you even see what you did in there? It's a real flood." The girl didn't immediately realize what was going on. She really did draw water tonight, after all the workers had left, but she could not remember if she turned off the faucet or not. So Mirabelle jumped out of bed in her nightgown and ran after Diego, thinking about where to get dry rags, because the ones in the utility room were probably already wet. That was the scoundrel's plan. When the girl entered the back room, she did not immediately realize what was happening. It was dry all around. The only light bulb on flickered faintly, creating a slight glowing haze everywhere. Suddenly, she heard a sharp click and a turn of the key in the keyhole behind her. Diego had locked the door and was now looking at her with wild eyes full of desire. Garcia Jr. began to move slowly toward the girl. "Diego, what on earth are you doing?" Mirabelle said in a voice full of fear. "You will regret it." "Regret? Why should I regret it? On the contrary, you and I are about to have so much fun that the whole house will shake." "Don't, please," the poor girl shouted, fighting off the rich man. But the rich bastard acted confidently and methodically, not listening to the tears and pleas for mercy. Tearing the shirt off Mirabelle, he acted like a predator who had finally got his desired prey. When it was over, Mirabelle wanted only one thing: to die right here and now. She had never experienced such shame, pain, and humiliation in her entire life. She was afraid to even raise her eyes to her tormentor. What if he wanted more? The girl frantically began to look around in search of some sharp object, and if he tried to do this to her again, she'd rather stab a knife or screwdriver into her heart right away, just to not feel him on her skin again. "Relax, I won't touch you again," Diego said in a lazy voice, adjusting his wide leather belt. "You are delicious, like popcorn." The scoundrel walked up to Mirabelle and squeezed her chin forcefully. "Do you know what the peculiarity of popcorn is?" he asked her, but he answered himself. "Popcorn tastes good while you eat it, but as soon as you've finished, you don't remember it anymore." "Get your filthy hands off me," Mirabelle hissed as she resisted the pressure. "You scumbag, sneaky man." Garcia Jr. only smirked. "I hope you're not planning on telling my parents about this. Remember, nymph, you're not the first maid I've spent my free time with. My father and mother are used to provincial fools like you trying to get money out of me all the time. But you surprised me this time. You're so innocent. Usually girls come here much more prepared and sophisticated, and, you know, I didn't have to ask them." "You have no heart," Mirabelle spat in his face. "I don't need it," Diego replied coldly. "A gold credit card and a tight wallet are enough. Any woman in your position would be happy if I paid her any attention, and you're crying. Ugh." The girl, wrapped in the scraps of her nightgown, continued to burn the rich man with a fierce stare. "And remember, you little insect, if you keep your mouth shut, you can keep working here. And if not, my parents will hear my version of the story in which you are an impudent seductress from a remote village, ready to sleep with a rich guy for money. In this case, you won't find a job in this city. Do you understand me?" He almost shouted the last words. Mirabelle silently nodded. She had almost lost the ability to think coherently from horror. "Good girl," said the rich bastard, smiling happily. "Now go to your room, and try not to wake anyone up." The violence had changed Mirabelle forever, and if before she had been polite to the other employees, trying to be respectful to everyone, now she simply isolated herself, preferring to spend her rare private moments of peace in her bedroom, previously locked up. At night she was plagued by disturbing dreams. In them she saw her late grandmother and her parents crying all the time. Sometimes she saw Diego's empty gray eyes laughing. The last nightmare was the worst. The young maid really didn't tell anyone about what had happened, not the rapist's parents, nor her own. She was afraid that her relatives would blame her for what had happened, and the whole village would discuss it. There was no point to tell about it to Diego's parents. Surely they were already aware of what their heir sometimes did. Mirabel was sure she was not his first victim, but everyone who was somehow connected to the house of this cursed family had to keep quiet. The price they were all forced to pay otherwise was too high. The gray and monotonous days dragged on one by one. Mirabel still worked as a maid, cleaning the master's rooms and serving Garcia at dinners. And the resentment gradually healed, like an open wound in her heart, and the pain slowly began to recede. The girl had to make tons of effort every day not to break under the pressure of heavy feelings. Only thoughts of her beloved family, who stayed in the village, kept her mentally alive. Now the girl had the opportunity to regularly send them small sums of money, which she was sure were an important help in their modest way of life. After a while, the girl realized with horror that she was pregnant. She managed to ask Pepita for a whole day off. Mirabel immediately went to the hospital where the doctor confirmed her worst fears. "Congratulations, you're 8 weeks pregnant," the smiling woman in the uniform said. "I can only imagine how happy Daddy will be." Then the doctor looked at the ring finger. There was no wedding ring. "Oh, so you're not married, or what?" she asked a little disdainfully. "No," Mirabel replied coldly. "Well," sighed the doctor, "let's hope he will propose to you when he finds out." The young maid said nothing to that. Mirabel decided not to delay and tell Diego that she was pregnant. After all, he was the father of her baby. She waited for him outside the billiard room, then grabbed the guy by the sleeve of his shirt and, overcoming her instinctive disgust, dragged him into the room for a serious conversation. "Wow, you are so hot today," he immediately joked. "I thought you didn't even want to see me. But it turns out you're a smart girl." The boy tried to stroke Mirabel's face, but she sharply pushed his palm aside. "Don't be elated," she replied angrily. "We need to talk. If it weren't for that, I wouldn't be talking to you." The girl looked at her rapist with hatred. "And what do you want to talk about?" the bastard mocked her. "Wait, let me guess. You finally decided that you need my money, right?" He laughed unpleasantly, and at that moment Mirabel uttered, "No, clown, I am pregnant." The laughter broke off abruptly. For a minute the guy stood looking at her, shocked. He could hardly understand what his maid was talking about, and when it came to him, he almost fainted. "What do you mean, pregnant?" he asked in an incomprehensible voice. "It's all because of you," Mirabel said. "You're the father. I've never had another man." Shocked Garcia slowly sat down in the large, soft armchair. He instantly felt a wave of panic, because if his father found out... "But wait, you can get rid of the baby, right? I'll give you the money. Don't worry about that. Neither you nor I need that baby." Mirabel narrowed her beautiful eyes. "What makes you think I don't need my baby? You're the only one who doesn't care about human life. It's not the baby's fault his father's a monster." Mirabel tried her best to pretend that Diego's presence didn't bother her, though. In fact, her heart clenched with horror every time he moved in his chair, like a snake looking at a rabbit he had once eaten. By pretending to be a cold-blooded bitch, the girl was trying to protect herself. She had tried to stop the scoundrel with kindness and caress before, but it didn't work. Now she tried to act using his own methods. She was already trying to take care of her baby's future. Besides, if people in the village found out that she had gotten rid of the baby, and the rumors would spread anyway, Mirabel would be called a baby killer once and for all. The village where the girl grew up has always been known for its traditional even a little, conservative views. "Give me some time to think," Diego finally asked her. "Let's think it over first, and then we'll make a decision." Mirabel, seeing that Diego did not answer her with a medical refusal, relaxed a little. Her heart was aching, but the maid nevertheless agreed to wait a couple of days. After all, she doesn't have to give him a baby. For Diego, this baby was an unfortunate accident. The only thing the girl wanted was to leave the mansion before her belly became too visible, and then she would sort everything out. She can even return home to her parents. Garcia Jr. was alone in his room, thinking, so the girl got pregnant. It's not a good thing, but it happens. The situation could have been rectified, but Mirabel flatly refused to get rid of the baby, and so she became one big problem for him and his famous family. Obviously, he had no plans to marry her, but Diego didn't want to support some bastard until 21 years old either. By the way, Mirabel has to prove that Diego is the father of her baby. The overall situation around the Garcia family also added fuel to the fire. Orbelin planned to run for Parliament this spring, and the scandal of the maid's pregnancy would have obviously damaged his political rating. Diego realized that this was the worst time for a scandal. Diego paced from corner to corner and didn't know what to do. If his father found out that he had taken this provincial girl by force, and moreover that she got pregnant, there would be a huge scandal. His father had already threatened repeatedly that he would send his son to the army unless he finally came to his senses. Such a turn of events would destroy what is left of their trustful monetary relationship. If his father lost his reputation in society, his son would automatically lose all the privileges and inheritance money that Orbelin had promised to leave him. And Diego was well aware that without his parents' money, he was nothing. Then the rich scoundrel suddenly realized that soon everyone would know about it anyway. She can't hide a big belly, and the bigger it would be, the more insistent they would start asking the girl who the father of her baby was, and she'll tell the truth. No, he would have to act carefully, but radically. Diego decided that he would not let a random maid ruin his beautiful life, and to do that he would have to do anything to save his and his family's reputation. Diego saw the only way out of the situation, to get Mirabel out of his life's path forever. Garcia Jr. decided that he had to act quickly, while Mirabel's belly was not big. Thinking over the best way to get rid of the girl, he was lost in doubts. He can set up an accident. For example, she might accidentally fall down the stairs, but that still wouldn't guarantee a 100% result. The girl might survive, or she might miscarry, and then the truth would come out. As for the more brutal methods involving weapons, there was a problem as well. The problem was that Diego had been afraid of blood since childhood. If someone killed even just a small fly in front of him, the boy had to stay in a private hospital for a couple of days afterward, recovering from the shock. Eventually, Diego decided to go another way. He figured out what time Mirabel usually had dinner in the evening and slipped a huge dose of sleeping pills into her glass of tea. Waiting for the girl to collapse unconscious on the floor, the villain loaded her onto the truck of his sports car and drove her outside the residential complex. The late fall in those areas was very cold. Even though it was not yet so dark, there was still a special nighttime chill in the air that was typical in November. When he reached the wide bridge over the river, Diego stopped for a moment. He was scared, but he had no choice. Mirabel must be silenced forever and take the proof of the crime to the grave. If he didn't do it now, it would be too late, and this could have ruined his family's well-being. Forgive me, my nymph, but it's better for everyone. Garcia Jr. turned to the breathless girl and, pulling her body from the trunk, quickly threw it over the railing of the bridge. The body fell into the cold water with a loud splash. The current was strong enough here. If she didn't go to the bottom right away, she would surely be swept far under the ice and no one would ever find her. Having done his shady business, Diego quickly got back in his car and drove off, leaving the silence of the night to be a witness to one more crime. The guy was pretty sure no one had seen him. However, contrary to the rich bastard's expectations, he was not alone. Mateo, an elderly hermit fisherman, was fishing at the time, drifting in a thicket of reeds in his old boat. Seeing the cold-blooded young man throw the girl off the bridge, the fisherman, without wasting a minute, left the bait he had prepared for the night and began paddling quickly, hoping to reach the victim faster than the current would carry her away. Grabbing the girl by the collar of her uniform, Mateo miraculously managed to pull her out of the water. As he felt her pulse on her neck, the old man exhaled a sigh of relief. Alive! But what would he do now with this unusual find? The first thing Mateo did was to take off his warm coat and wrap the nearly frozen girl in it. She didn't have any ID or even a business card to know where she might work or live. Only one thing was clear. The girl urgently needed help, and the fisherman knew the place where he could take her without fear. For years, Mateo had lived as a hermit in a small hut near the river. His livelihood was mostly fishing, but sometimes, especially in the summer, he managed to catch wild ducks. He gave all these birds and fish to the old convent, not far from the place where Mateo pulled out the Mirabelle. The elderly man gave them fish and meat, and in return he got large portions of various foods from the convent's kitchen. So they had been cooperating with the place of God for 30 years on mutually beneficial terms. It was late night when the fisherman reached the huge gray stone fortress. The old man did not hesitate to knock several times on the gate of the monastery with a massive cast iron ring. At first, no one opened it, but then a light turned on in one of the windows, and in a few minutes, Mateo already handed the senseless drowned woman to the local abbess, Fevronia, and a dozen young nuns, who had rushed to help their abbess at such a late hour. "Just be careful with her," said Mateo. "The girl dived into the icy water. Maybe she froze to death." "Don't worry, Mateo. If it is the will of our Lord, your mermaid will get well," Fevronia smiled reservedly. They provided all the necessary care and left Mirabelle to warm up next to the heated stove. From hypothermia, the girl went into nervous shock. Shock, cold, and a massive dose of sleeping pills caused an immediate miscarriage. When one of the nuns saw the blood on the blanket, she immediately understood what happened. With the abbess's permission, she called an ambulance. The doctors were shocked to learn of the circumstances that led to Mirabelle's arrival at the convent, but they did not go into the details. Their job was to save the patient. Everything else was not that important, especially since Fevronia promised to take the girl to the convent as soon as she was able to walk. At the same time, the doctors were still obligated to inform the relatives of what had happened, so they waited until the patient regained consciousness. Fevronia, on the other hand, felt that she had to be by the side of the rescued girl no matter what. When Mirabelle entered the convent entrusted to Fevronia by the Lord, the abbess realized that this was the very sign she had been waiting for several years. The fact is that in recent years, the woman began to doubt the rightness of her chosen path, and the girl found in the river seemed to bring her back to the path of faith. When Mirabelle came to her senses, it was to everyone's surprise that she remembered absolutely nothing about herself or how she had ended up in the cold river. The poor girl thought that perhaps she wanted to commit suicide because of an unplanned pregnancy. The doctors had told her about it, and so she gladly agreed to stay for a while in the convent together with the abbess and the other sisters. In this way, Mirabelle hoped to purify her soul of a terrible sin. By the grace of fate, The former maid began to live in the convent together with the ordinary nuns. Every morning the girl prayed, cleaned the yard, participated in the cooking, and prayed again for the salvation of her soul and the soul of her unborn baby. It seemed all the time that some important detail of reality was eluding her, and that if she could find it, she would be able to remember everything. But until she could not find that detail, Mirabelle continued to spend her days in prayer and hard work. She never dared to accept true monastic vows. The girl wore a cassock. Her hair was always covered with a kerchief, no makeup on her face, but at the same time, Mirabelle quietly performed all the standard duties of a nun. Therefore, the local sisters considered the girl something like a servant who can leave their monastery at any time, when she herself is ready and wants to return to secular life again. Thus, a year passed. One day, Mirabelle was asked to pick up a box of donations from a charitable center. The money was to be used to rebuild the abandoned part of a convent where there used to be rooms for women who got into difficult situations with their children. Back in the day, this part of the convent had suffered a sudden collapse of dilapidated structures, so its repair had long been Feveronia's deepest dream. While picking up the heavy wooden box, Mirabelle happened to notice a glossy magazine right on the reception desk. The picture on the cover looked familiar. She opened the right page and carefully looked at the picture, showing a bride and groom who were getting married and on that occasion invited everyone to their huge mansion that looked like a fairy tale castle. The event promised the guests a performance of celebrities and a real royal feast. So those who wished to join the party were free to come to the Garcia mansion on the appointed day and time, which would be announced a little later. Garcia, the nun whispered, staring at the attractive yet indifferent face of the young groom. The bride beside him looked exactly like one of those beauty bloggers whose videos her best friend Leticia had loved to watch in the past. Garcia, Diego Garcia, Leticia, Luisa. The pain sliced Mirabelle's heart in two halves with a sharp blade, causing the world to go completely dark for a moment. In a fraction of a second, the girl's memory brought back all the images of her life before the convent. Mirabelle remembered her beloved parents, all that had happened to her in the cursed mansion, and her best friends, who are probably convinced that she is long dead. The girl tore the magazine in half with such force that the thin pages seemed to squeak pitifully under the pressure of her fragile but strong fingers. Fortunately, no one was around at that moment, or else there would have been many uncomfortable questions for the young nun in a cassock. The lavishly decorated yard of the Garcia mansion was buzzing with popular dance music. Guests came to the party, congratulating the young bride and groom. Waiters and waitresses were everywhere, providing a steady stream of liquor and delicious appetizers for all the guests. Diego wanted to show that the generosity of his house extended to absolutely all segments of the population, so he commanded to welcome anyone who wished to attend the celebration. His bride was the daughter of a very powerful official, with whom Garcia Sr. had a close friendship and profitable business for many years. The girl was beautiful, but she did not need the groom's feelings. Both knew that this marriage was a bargain for both parties, and therefore they had only to demonstrate to everyone their fake love. Mirabelle entered the party almost unnoticed. Her long hooded robe completely hid her face, so the former maid didn't have to worry about anyone recognizing her. As the celebrity guests began to read out toasts from the stage, Mirabelle sneaked up behind them and, seizing an opportunity, deftly hopped onto the high wooden platform. An ominous silence immediately reigned all around. Mirabelle took a beautiful, expensive microphone with the initials of the house owners and sharply took off her black hood. Diego's face instantly turned pale. It seemed all the blood in his veins suddenly dried up, leaving only prickly dust. The bewildered bride couldn't understand what a nun in a cassock was doing here, moreover with a huge cross hanging from a gilded chain, like a fateful symbol of justice. Mirabelle stared at the rich man who had tried to kill her and her unborn baby just a year ago, and she spoke slowly into the microphone. I have only one thing to say to the bride right now. Please remember that there is a rapist and child killer sitting next to you. You could be next at any moment. At the same moment, the guards grabbed Mirabelle and dragged the unresisting girl to the other side of the park. The nun awarded the groom with a look full of utter contempt, after which he felt his whole life crumbling like a sandcastle under the force of the ocean's waves. Obviously, the party was over. After numerous and very humiliating proceedings for the Garcia family, the career of the Bread King came to an irrevocable end. Orbelon was never able to run for Parliament. It was the father of Diego's ex-bride and dirt on his own son that prevented him from doing so. The family's business also suffered enormous losses, and then it was finally liquidated by government agencies. The bride's parents were in very influential political circles, so the desire to wipe the Garcia family off the face of the earth was almost the main goal of the year for them. Eventually, they succeeded. Diego, permanently covered by the cloak of shame in his family, became a persona non grata in high society. The father struggled to negotiate with the police to keep his son from being sent to jail for a long time. Instead, Orbelon placed Diego in a closed, specialized clinic, where his dear son faced a long course of psychotherapy and treatment against various addictions. After learning what Mirabelle had gone through and how she almost died because of his potential son-in-law, the father of the bride commanded the Garcia family to pay the girl a huge financial compensation. In case of refusal, the media will be immediately provided with an interview that mentions all the previous victims of their vicious son. Ophelia, Diego's mother, burning with shame, immediately signed a check to Mirabelle, which she could easily cash at any bank. The woman wanted to do whatever she could to somehow pay off their guilt to the girl. Mirabelle herself, having come a long way from a naive girl from the provinces to a maid and a nun who had lost her memory, but who found faith in God in her heart, left the convent to continue her own journey. Fevronia did not try to persuade her to stay, though the woman's heart had become attached to this unusual girl over a long period of time. The abbess had too much respect for other people's lives and couldn't allow herself to interfere with God's providence and condemn people to exist in a place not intended for them. With Garcia's money, Mirabelle first repaired the damaged building in the convent. Now all women who had suffered from the criminal actions of men could go there again. With the rest of the money, she opened a small beauty salon, where she immediately hired her best friends. Leticia and Luisa tried to find Mirabelle for a long time after her sudden disappearance from Garcia's house, but then they lost hope. They were extremely happy to know that Mirabelle is alive, and they happily agreed to become not only employees of the salon, but also business partners of the former nun maid, and they promised to accompany her everywhere and not to let her go anywhere alone. The girl's business was small, but it had already begun making a steady income. All three of them joked that soon they would become real business women, just as their parents dreamed. Now everything is going well in Mirabelle's life. She met a great guy, Tristan. He works as a volunteer at the city shelter for the poor people, and the girl tries to be there as often as possible to help those in need together with Tristan. She is absolutely happy with Tristan and was able to finally forget those terrible days in the mansion of the rich Bread Kings. The young people already decided to live together. The girl's parents moved to the city. She bought them a spacious apartment and now furnishing it for them. Tristan does not mind because he was raised in an orphanage and finally found such a long-awaited family with Mirabelle and her parents. A nun came to the wedding. The rich people laughed, but when she took the microphone and said 3 words to the bride,
If you're enjoying it as well, leave a like and subscribe to the channel.